As I commented about the book of Hebrews, the study that we just completed, I made several comments about how it tied in with our study of Leviticus. And the same is true with the Old Testament book of Numbers, which you will find in your Old Testament, the book of Numbers. The very title of it could put us to sleep. The book of Numbers. The original title in the original writings, the titles of the book would be the first lines or first words of the book. So the original Hebrew title of this book was The Lord Spoke, because that's the first verse of the first chapter. The Lord spoke to Moses. And then it was eventually translated into the English word Numbers. Why is it called Numbers? There are two main things that you see in the book of Numbers. One of them is narrative, and that's where we're going to spend most of our time, the stories and accounts that happen in the book of Numbers, and they're very, very interesting. And then the other thing is numbers. Census counts, legislation, laws. We need to remember that as we look at the ancient Jewish world, that the...
It's a woodpecker.
Is it a woodpecker?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's... unless somebody knows Morse code, we'll just try to ignore that as much as we can. That when we look at the nation of Israel and the Hebrew people, the descendants of Abraham, those who are living under the promise of Genesis 12, that I'll make you a great nation and I'll give you a land and I'll make you an example to other nations. We're going to see in the book of Hebrews that we do have a great nation, but the people of God are failing. In fact, the book of Hebrews, for about 2/3 of it, is really the story of the failure of the Hebrew people. And while that can be frustrating and sad, it is also obviously a great lesson for us today. The question that I posed in the text that I sent out to prepare you a little bit for today was, what are we doing that the Hebrews did that caused such consternation? And the answer to that is grumbling and hesitation. And so we'll talk about that as we go along. So what I want to do today is talk about some general characteristics of the book of Numbers, and then we may get to chapter 13 as we go the overview, and that's the first narrative story of great consequence and interest. So one of the things that we need to, as I was beginning to say, that among the Hebrew people, their whole system of society is different than ours today. So as we look as 21st century Western Christians, we have ceremonies that are nice. There are things that we tend to do, meeting, and we have a fairly regular kind of thing. We do our songs, we do our prayers, we do our announcements, and we do our message. And some of you have been with organizations where ceremonies are very important. Even at our national events, we stand and sing the national anthem. We have parades. We're going to have a Veterans Day parade here in Huerfano County for the first time in a long time. So ceremonies are important, but very few of them are legislated. And then we have three different sets of laws. We have one set of criminal laws So if somebody assaults me, they can be prosecuted by the state. But we also have civil laws. So apart from that criminal system, if somebody punches me, I can sue them for whatever damages, and that's in the civil system. We also have reams and reams and reams of regulations, building codes, and all kinds of different things that we have to abide by, right down to the mattress tag that says don't remove under penalty of law. And then we have our religious expectations, but all those, because Israel is a theocracy, all those were bundled up together. So we're going to see aspects of all of this in the book of Numbers. It's important that we understand that as we go through the Old Testament, go through the Pentateuch, Numbers is not occurring in history in the order that occurs in the Old Testament. Numbers begins all at the beginning of the second year of the escape from Egypt, escape from slavery. They have already been through this Mount Sinai experience, and so they have received the Ten Commandments. They went through the rebellion of the golden calf, and they are on to the journey toward the Promised Land. As I mentioned, the Promised Land, if you look at a map and you see where Egypt was as they crossed the Red Sea, and if you look at where the Promised Land on the other side of the Jordan River begins, you can walk that in 10 or 11 days. Now, if you're moving almost 2 million people, it might take you longer, but they certainly could have gotten there by the time that Numbers is being recorded. But there was a very specific purpose why that early delay. One of those purposes was God wanted to set up the tabernacle, and so we see that being done in Leviticus. And we see a lot of things, a lot of rules being given in promises in Deuteronomy. Some of the things in Numbers happened before or after Deuteronomy. And there was also some conditioning, some testing that needed to happen. So when we look at the book of Numbers, we are looking at Moses trying to set up a cohesive society. We're looking at setting up the religious rituals, the penalties for civil and criminal offenses. We're looking at the census for the military. We're looking at the organization and logistics for the whole society, and particularly for the army of the Israelis. And so when you look at these tribal names, and you look at these rules, and you look at all these different things, it's very, very purposeful. It's not something that we kind of understand, but we do if we look at this saying, okay, what would our society be like if we were just beginning? Cheryl and I were we have our own water district in the little community where we live, and we had our annual water district meeting. And every time I go to a meeting like this, kind of reminds me of some Baptist church business meetings that I went to as a kid and young adult. It's amazing that we have a constitution. That people can sit down and agree on something, which seems to be a lost art in our current headlines. But these edicts from God through Moses, God spoke directly to Moses, is to set up a functioning society. Now we're going to see that didn't always work because of the people and because some of the jealousies and leadership, and that's part of the narrative that we'll get to at some point. So just looking at the scripture, verse 1, chapter 1, the Lord spoke to Moses in the tent of meeting in the wilderness of Sinai on the first day of the second month of the second year after Israel's departure from the land of Egypt. Take a census of the entire Israelite community by their clans and their ancestral families, counting the names of every male one by one. The purpose of this was to make sure that Moses understood the strength of the Israeli army. You and Aaron are to register those who are 20 years old or more by their military divisions, everyone who can serve in Israel's army. A man from each tribe is to be with you, each one at the head of his ancestral family, and these are the names of the men that are to assist you. So we have subordinate leaders, we have advisors, we have people that were divided into different groups, very organized. So as tedious as this may seem, it is very purposeful. But I want you to note something in that 20 years old or older. I have heard some commentary, and it's interesting to think about this. Is everybody familiar with the term, the age of accountability? There is a point in a child's life as they mature, intellectually and physically, when it's no longer their parents who are responsible for their spiritual life and spiritual well-being, but they make their own decision, and today I'm going to be accountable. Now, traditionally, in the Jewish community, it's been the bar mitzvah for young men and bat mitzvah for young women, and at about age 13, the young Jewish boy will say, today I am a man. I am responsible for my own relationship to God. My parents are no longer responsible for my relationship to God. And as I've said from this pulpit, we are sadly lacking in our culture of a point of demarcation between childhood and adulthood, which I think has given rise to the fact that we have a lot of 25-year-old teenagers running around, because we never had a point. And what is the point in our culture? We don't stand up at age 13 and acknowledge some things in the past and some responsibilities for the future and say, today I am a man. Is it the first time that they get drunk? Is it the first time they have sex? Is it when they register to vote? Is it when they turn 16 to get their driver's license, 18 and register for the draft, 21 and are eligible for? We really don't know in this country, and so we don't have a point at which somebody says, okay, I was once a child, now I'm a man. Some churches have taken up the mantle to say, okay, we're going to take that over, and we're going to help educate young men and young women what their adult responsibilities are, and we're going to have them declare in the presence of the community and their family that today they are responsible for their own spiritual well-being. But there are a couple of hints in this Old Testament here that the age of accountability may be 19, because you did not serve in the army until you were at least 20 years old. We also see later, when this current generation that we're going to be talking about for the first few chapters is not allowed to enter into the promised land because of their lack of faith and disobedience, that applied only to people that were 20 and over. So perhaps that is a more accurate time of accountability. I will tell you, what you hear frequently cited is your brain's not fixed, your brain's not finished until you're 25, and I will tell you that is a misapplied, mythical, ridiculous statement. Now, it may be that not all the branches of your neurons and everything are not completely gelled, but that is partly a matter of experience. And since in this generation, I'm going to sound like a boomer here, but in this generation, we don't allow kids to have a lot of experiences. We protect them so much that they don't develop the skills and tools and neural connections that they need in order to make mature decisions. That's a freebie I'm throwing out there for you. So as we look through the book, you'll see the descendants of this tribe and that tribe, and we go through to verse 46. All those registered numbered 603,550. This does not count women and children. And so some people looking at some other books, some scholars will say probably 1.5 to 2 million people that are scrambling across the desert. So at least 1 million, possibly more. Here's something of interest. There's a second census that you will read about as we get near the end of the book of Numbers, and that number is almost the same. Now, one of the initial instructions God gave to human beings was to go forth and multiply. And when I think about 70 people had moved into Egypt at Joseph's invitation during the Great Famine, when they left 400 something years later, finally got out of the under the thumb of the pharaohs, they numbered this 1 to 1.5 to 2 million people. And then they get into this interim period before they get to the promised land, and over a period of 40 years, they don't multiply at all. The number differs by about 1,000 from the first census to the last census. Interesting that God did not bless them in their wilderness wandering as he had before and since. Now, chapter 2, again, interesting from a logistics point of view. I don't know how many of you have had to make decisions about how to deploy machinery or activities or people that you might supervise, who's going to do this, when, at what time, at what point. I used to work in a battery factory, and I would take the battery shell off the belt, put them in a thing, and put a lead lead in there, and hit buttons, and it seated the lead, and then I'd take them off, and I did this, and it went on another. Did that about somewhere between 700,000 times a night. Not the most fascinating thing, but I've appreciated the job, and I appreciate those people that were still working on the assembly line. But the task of making sure that this product was ready for this workstation and then went to this workstation, and they were actually batteries that were internally installed in some other appliance. It was a Rival, the people that make the Rival crock pots. There's no batteries in crock pots that I know of, but whatever they were making, you never saw the batteries, they were internal. But all that to say, the logistics of running a big operation with a lot of people is very critical and pretty interesting. I'm really amazed every time I start and drive our car to think about all the design and all the engineering and all the science and all the materials. And as I remember when my son realized at a fairly early age, you mean everything that is made is basically made out of dirt? And that's right. Everything comes out of the ground eventually. Even the synthetic things that we put together. And somehow, from the primitive days of just having rocks and sticks and dirt, we can put those all together in certain ways and drive it around. That really is pretty remarkable. And they're getting more and more complicated all the time. So, God chose that each tribe has certain responsibilities. In chapter 1, verse 47, the Levites were not registered with them for their ancestral tribes. So that's another number of over and above the 600,000, because they weren't going to go to war. Their responsibility was the tabernacle. Appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, all its furnishings, and everything in it. They are to transport the tabernacle and all its articles, take care of it, and camp around it. Whenever the tabernacle is to move, the Levites are to take it down, and wherever it is to stop at a campsite, the Levites are to set it up. Any unauthorized person who comes near it is to be put to death. So, very strict rules, Levites only. Hey, can I help you with that? You're dead. Yeah. It's just the Levites. Now, I may have told you how much I hate camping out. If that was news to you, I'll just tell you, I hate camping out. And one of the reasons for that is I'm not a detailed person. if you're going to camp out, how many of you like to camp out? Yeah, several of you. Okay, bless your hearts. If you're going to camp out, you've got to get all your material together, and you've got to pack it just right, and then you've got to choose the campsite, and then you've got to prepare the campsite, and then you've got to unpack, you've got to put up your tent, and then you've got to decide where your waste, both bodily and food, is going to go, and how to handle your trash, and whether there's water. If there's water that's naturally there, you can't just lap it up. You've got to filter it right or boil it or something. And then you've got to know how to take it down so that everything fits back in the sack that it came from. All right, and this is why most of the time when Cheryl and I and the family camped out, we just put the tent in the dumpster on the way out of the campground. A lot easier that way. Yeah, I'm not kidding. So logistics and organization is very, very important, and this is what the Lord is doing here. In chapter 2, the Lord spoke to Moses. It says, the Israelites are to camp under their respective banners beside the flags of their ancestral families. Now, and then it goes into detail about where Judah goes and where Reuben's clan goes, where the Levites are, where Ephraim's military divisions are, where Dan's divisions are. Because as you look at the tabernacle, which would be the center of the camp out, and some of the times that they would have the tabernacle up and standing, and they were not moving during this 40 years. There were lots of times where they would stay for days or perhaps even months that delayed them from getting into the promised land. So every time that they set up in exactly the same way. And they would set up around the tabernacle. Moses and Aaron would be at the entrance to the tabernacle, the east gate. And this all has significance in the New Testament and the life of Christ and the symbolism. And then the tribe of Levi would be there because they're guarding the most holy places. And then you'd have, and there were ranks among the Jewish tribes. Some had more people in them and some had different responsibilities. And so the tribes always set up in exactly the same way. There were some on the corners to get a view of everything, and there were some on each side as well. So it was always the same. And again, as I pointed out when we were talking about Leviticus, it doesn't take too much imagination to see an overhead view and see that the way that that camp is laid out is actually in the shape of a cross. But the significant tribes were in a certain place, and the lesser tribes were in a certain place. And then talks about the Levites. One of the things that we see in the several books in the Old Testament is stuff that happens outside the camp. So anything that's impure, if you became defiled by disobeying one of the Levitical laws, then you had to go outside the camp for purification. The leftovers that weren't consumed in the sacrificial process were taken outside the camp. All the refuse, all the unholy stuff, all the defiled stuff happened outside the camp. Wouldn't it have been more appropriate for Jesus to have been executed in the temple in Jerusalem? But no. Where was he executed? Outside the camp. Because he was defiled. He became unholy. He became anathema to the holy God. Chapter 4, we see the duties of the Kohathites. In verse 4 of chapter 4, the service of the Kohathites at the tent of meeting concerns the most holy objects. So what we see is these different tribes within the Levites. There's the Gershonites that talks about in verses 21 and following, in verses 29 and following, the Merarites, and then the Levites again. And each one of them, some of them carried the most holy objects, some of them disassembled the tabernacle itself. Some of them carried the supporting beams that held up the tent structure. So there were very specific duties given to very specific parts of the transport of the tabernacle. So this morning when I said, if you want to volunteer to help with the kids, and by the way, you can just give those to me or something. If that's not your thing, that's not your thing. We're not all called to the same kinds of things. And so you may have a very specific sense of what your role is within the body. Over in chapter 9, verse 15, on the day the tabernacle was set up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, the tent of the testimony, and it appeared like fire above the tabernacle from evening to morning. Now, we probably remember that as the Hebrew people were being led out of Egypt, that they were led by a cloud during the day and fire at night. And so as these manifestations of God were present around the tabernacle, that told the Israeli people, are we going to move today or are we going to stay here? And so they decided, based on God's leadership and communication through this visual presence, when to move. And again, sometimes it would be a day and sometimes it would be longer. Now we get to chapter 11 and we move from the legislation to the narrative, and I'll just tease you a little bit about this as we look at chapter 11 where our first major narrative begins. Now the people began complaining openly before the Lord about hardship. When the Lord heard, his anger burned, and fire from the Lord blazed among them and consumed the outskirts of the camp. Then the people cried out to Moses, and he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. God is a God of love. We trust him with our lives. We know that he has a good plan of good gifts, but he's also a God of justice and wrath. And when his people are given provision after provision and assurance after assurance and evidence after evidence, and they rebel because of some momentary discomfort, God was not pleased. There are several moments in the book of Numbers where God is going to send some judgment, whether it be snakebite or fire or plague. And at one point, God told Moses, tell you what, I'm just going to get rid of everybody but you and your family, and we'll just start over. And Moses, inexplicably, at every point, says, God, please don't do that. Please don't do that. And one of his arguments is, look, everybody knows that these are your people. And if you destroy them, then your enemies are going to make a mockery of you. I wrote a little devotion one time that created some controversy. And I said there are different ways to pray. Sometimes we might pray like Moses did, Lord, if this thing happens or doesn't happen, it's going to be a discredit to you. And so for your sake, would you answer it this way? And so there are other things that we can bring to the throne and ration out. Now, we can also say, just put it out there, let your heart be seen to the Lord, and let God make his own decision. But there's also something about maybe we should make some kind of argument, some kind of rational argument, some kind of theological argument, some kind of out-of-the-soul kind of confession that helps us put into words why we are asking for something from the Lord. And this is what Moses did time after time. The people cried out to Moses, And he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So the place was named Taberah because the Lord's fire had blazed among them. Verse 4, and I love this translation, the riffraff among them had a strong craving for other food. One bad apple destroys the entire basket, right? Why is it that the naysayers and the critics and the complainers seem to get way more traction and attention than people who say, let's just trust God, let's just use what we've been given, let's be thankful for where we are, but we don't pay much attention to those people, and sometimes we deride those people and say, quit being such an optimist. Let's be realistic here. We're tired of this same old food. Aren't you tired of this same old food? Well, yeah, but that's God's provision. I'm thankful for it. We could be starving, so let's not complain about it too much. But no, the riffraff among them had a strong craving for other food. And as we have seen in other books in the Old Testament, we see that the Israelites had a bizarre memory of what it was like being a slave.
Yeah.
And they wanted to go back. The Israelites wept. They wept and said, who will feed us meat? We remember the free fish we ate in Egypt, along with the cucumbers and melons and leeks and onions and garlic. But now our appetite is gone. There's nothing to look at but this manna. Again, we don't know exactly what manna was. They didn't know exactly what manna was. In fact, a good interpretation of the word manna is, what's this? The manna resembled coriander seed, and its appearance was like that of bdellium, which I don't know what that is. People walked around and gathered it. They ground it into a pair of grinding stones, or crushed it in a mortar, then boiled in a cooking pot and shaped it into cakes. You remember Bubba in Forrest Gump explaining all the ways you can make shrimp? Boiled shrimp, fried shrimp, chicken shrimp. This is what they did with the manna. Tasted like pastry. Moses heard the people, family after family, weeping at the entrance of their tents. One of the observations we might possibly make here is that God manifested himself at the tabernacle. And so perhaps the people thought that when they were in their own tents, God was not there, he was over here.
Yeah.
And so complaining at home around the dinner table, the old joke about every Sunday meal is roast pastor. God hears that too, not just at the tabernacle. The Lord was very angry. Moses was also provoked. And said, why are you angry with me? And why you burden me with all these people? Moses is talking to God here. So if you've ever been in leadership, you may have prayed this prayer. Lord, why do I have these people? Why have you saddled me with these people? And I find it interesting, and here's Moses whining. And I would say it's a lament. Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth to you, that you should tell me, carry them at your breast as a nursing mother carries a baby to the land that you swore to give to her ancestors, imply that we haven't seen yet? Where can I get meat to give all these people? For they're weeping to me, give us meat to eat. I can't carry all these people by myself. They are too much for me. If you're going to treat me like this, please kill me right now if I have found favor with you. And don't let me see my misery anymore. Now, God hears and answers Moses' lament, but he was angered at the people's grumbling. Remember, I talked about this on a couple of occasions. Lamenting, pouring your heart out to God, expecting him to respond to you is different than just mumbling and grumbling and causing trouble with no particular end in sight, except maybe somebody will hear me whining and come hold my hand. That's not what God honors. He honors the sincere lament of his people. So this begins at this point in the book of Numbers, about a third of the way through, the reality of the rest of the story that lasts for 40 years. And that is the people's disobedience, their grumbling, their rebellion, their blaming, and all of the things that happen that caused them to go through this 40 years. The significance of the book of Numbers includes the fact that they have left slavery but have not yet gained the promised land. They are living in the middle. You and I are living in the middle. We are in the desert. And how are we going to respond? We've been saved, but we're not to heaven yet. We haven't fulfilled our complete spiritual potential. We're in that interim period, which is what the book of Numbers talks about for about 2/3 of it. And so the lessons that we learn about the Hebrew people as they dealt with that not yet is going to be significant. And the things that God reveals to them for their salvation are things that are going to have a very significant messianic meaning and a precursor to the coming of Christ, who saves by grace.